I welcome the opportunity to speak on this legislation. I welcome that quarantine has been introduced. I deplore the fact that it's been introduced on a piecemeal basis and makes absolutely no sense in terms of the serious threat that we're facing. The word bolt of lighting has been used by a previous Fianna Fáil speaker. There was no bolt of lighting here. The background to this is back in February the 11th. That's over a year ago. The World Health Organization declares COVID a public health emergency of international concern. On February the 27th, the first case was reported in Northern Ireland. February the 29th, and significantly, we've no February the 29th this year, but the first case was reported in the Republic. On March the 11th, almost a year ago, the Director General of the World Health Organization declared a pandemic. He said, not a word to use lightly or carelessly. We who have been assessing this outbreak around the clock, and we are deeply concerned both by the alarming levels of spread and severity. And the next part, ministers, and I welcome both ministers to the Chamber, thank you, and by the alarming levels of inaction. That was March the 11th, last year, a year ago, the alarming levels of inaction. We ignored the existing structure that was there, the emergency, I actually forget the name of it, I'll come to it in a minute, but the actual structure that was there for dealing with emergencies. We simply bypassed that and ignored that without explanation. We ignored the fact that the public health service was at crisis point, both in the hospitals and then the actual Department of Public Health in its regional bases across the country, totally at crisis point, still is, with the strike postponed. We ignored the report in relation to public health, and over a year later we've done nothing from the pandemic, not to mention when the report was published. A year later, we still have no clear message, no strategy, and we're relying on the rollout of vaccination, which in my opinion is simply one part in what should be a zero COVID strategy. Now, we've been laughed at in relation to that. I don't think it's a laughing matter, and indeed an awful lot of very respected people, including Dr. Scully, who was almost sanctified in his own lifetime, something very unusual in relation to the cervical smear debacle, has been ignored on this completely. His views have been utterly ignored, and he has been a consistent voice to say we must treat this with an all-Ireland basis in relation to the ports and the airports, and we must head for a zero strategy, utterly ignored so when it suits the government. We have messages coming out that are just appalling, and Minister, I'm glad the Minister for Justice is with you today. The Minister for Transport should be here too, and indeed the Taoiseach should be here, because this is extremely serious. A year later, we're going to look at quarantine, and the figures are startling. And before I come to the figures, the manner of the announcements are just simply are just unacceptable. I'm not going to waste my few minutes going through them, but we have an announcement to the Daily Mirror, we have another to Radio na Gaeltachta, then we have your debacle on Clare Daly, then we have you on Twitter at 12 o'clock at night time, and we have a Minister for State saying something completely different. And all the while we have no enforcement of passenger locator forms, and now we know that that operation has been privatised. We have no oversight of a self-isolation over the last year. We have untested troops going through Shannon, and yet this government saw fit to follow up on social welfare recipients. We ignored direct provision, we ignored nursing homes, and I'm on the record for continuously highlighting nursing homes as far back as March. We've ignored the COVID committee that was set up to monitor the situation, and there are very good recommendations. None of them have been enforced. And today we're dealing with a report from the Irish Human Rights and Equality highlighting the serious concerns in relation to human rights, in relation to draconian legislation, which I've put my name to most reluctantly on the basis of a quid pro quo, that you would come back to us in an honest manner and deal with items in the Dáil, not in the Mirror, not on Radio na Gaeltachta, even though my greatest respect, mass onward on radio. This is the place for announcements to instil confidence in the people. Now we're dealing with the people in draconian manner with increased fines, putting a burden on the guards, an extra burden at the point where our relationship with the guards had turned for the better. We're making their life impossible. I hope that you accept the amendments in making mandatory quarantine, absolutely mandatory for all travellers into the country, with the view to dealing with the pandemic. Thank you.